Good morning, and thank you for tuning in today to Speaking of Gas. This is a look at what matters to you, the owner of oil and gas rights in Pennsylvania, and it's brought to you by the GasWellGuru, educating and advocating for Pennsylvania landowners. The webcast is recorded and can be viewed on my channel on YouTube. And hopefully you've taken a look at the prior editions of Speaking of Gas that are up there as well. So I took a little time off. I'm not exactly sure how long that was, but I'm back, and I thought it was appropriate to, for this first one in 2005, to take a look at where we are in January of 2005. And so that's where I am today. I'll say here in the beginning, I did this in the past weekly, or attempted to. I think that was too frequent. I don't know exactly what the schedule will be, but if you're a subscriber, you will get that notice that I have one coming up. And you also get a reminder the morning of the webcast that it'll be happening with a link, so you don't have to dig through all your emails. So where are we in this new year? I'm going to give you a graphic here, and let me fiddle around since I haven't done a lot of these just lately. This is where we are with oil and gas drilling in Pennsylvania. And I'm going to go through some numbers that this map represents. And so let me turn my scribbler off here. Okay, so the map as it's represented here is the active unconventional wells in Pennsylvania. And over the course of the shale play, you can see that, I'm hoping my pointer thing goes away. Okay, this should be working live so that I can move around this map. This shows the active unconventional wells. There are other wells I'm going to talk about. And if I select all the well status, let me switch to a different screen so that I can, let me switch to a live screen so that I can put this up here and move around it like I want to. Share a window. Okay, this should work out better. Okay, so here we are with all the unconventional wells marked. Now, if I select all the statuses of wells that are out there still in the unconventional play, then the screen will populate with a number of symbols that represent the wells that are, well, here I've selected conventional also. In the unconventional, apologize for the delay. Hopefully you are all seeing my screen here. Right. Okay. I hope this is up here like I expect. Make sure anyone isn't commenting on this. Okay. Guess I'm a little rusty. Oh, this is not doing. I'm seeing the window. All right, let me try to get that map up again. Select a tab to share. Okay, here it is again. We'll see if this works. I'm not having a lot of faith. Okay, so yes, now it's up there. So you see all these other dots, they've got pluses in them. Some of them are pink. That's representing the wells that are plugged and abandoned or in some phase of not producing, not being an active well. And then if you, like I did in the beginning, select conventional wells, and okay, select conventional wells, then you're going to see all these blue wells populate that are conventional wells that I'll also talk about in the presentation. So this is what the map looks like of all drilling across Pennsylvania. And that is plugged and abandoned, unconventional, and conventional. Okay. So let's skip into the presentation, which should go a little better than trying to share that. See where we are at the beginning of 2005. I was asked to do a presentation, or not presentation, but a calculation of, how many oil and gas royalty recipients are there in Pennsylvania? How many people are actually benefiting from this? And so I did some research, and this was part of the result of that research. So since 2004, this was a number that was kind of surprising to me. We have seen 24,449 wells permitted in the state. Now, those are not all active wells at this point. So what happened to the rest of them? There's 11,088 wells, and this was as of the October production report, that are not active. So they are in some stage either of most likely going away in this list. So I've divided those into two lists, and there are 9,000. And the reason this is important is there's wells like this in your neighborhood. Everybody knows about them. And in most cases, everybody's wondering what the status is. Are they going to drill the wells? Is anything going to happen? So understanding the different status of the wells is important to know what the answer is. So there were 9,595 wells that were never spud. That means the drill bit never hit the ground. They never drilled a top hole or anything. And of those, these were just two different designations that I believe mean essentially the same thing. 7,686, the reporter or the operator reported that they were never not drilled. And then 1,909 proposed but never materialized. And so those wells were, they were a thought at some point. There was a permit issued. I can think of a neighbor that had a stake in the ground and a permit, and then, nothing ever happened. It just went away. And that's likely part of these wells. And, if the drill bit never hit the ground, I think DEP is less, probably don't have a lot of reason to come in and regulate what happens with those permits. The permits expire if they aren't used. And I'll make another comment about that after I talk about the wells that were spud. So there were 1,493 wells that were actually spud. So that could mean that they brought a rig in, drilled the top hole, maybe they drilled through the water table, they drilled the vertical. They could have had a horizontal drill, but at some point, 1,372 of those were plugged, and then 121 were abandoned. Now, abandoned means something different than what it used to. Wells that were abandoned, they're in the news all the time now. All these older wells, and I'm talking about conventional before the unconventional drilling, were abandoned. They just walked away from them. And so, there's a legendary hole in the ground that, you could light a match on or whatever. And that now the state is going through the process with companies of plugging those wells properly. So, but this 21, this is a number that kind of gets duplicated in the next report because there were actually a number of wells, primarily in Tioga County, that were started. And then with the company, they entered into a consent order with the DEP to actually plug those wells. Hopefully I'm not being naive here, but I think in the process of shale development that I don't think we're going to have wells that are going to just be walked away from. Somebody's going to be responsible for that. And DEP, I mean, I've seen cases where a company wants to apply for a permit, but they've got too many open wells or they've got these abandoned wells out there, and DEP is going to say, you need to remediate that. You need to remediate the sites, or plug in abandoned. So hopefully into the future, we're not going to see that situation where wells then become someone else's responsibility. So those are those 11,088 wells that just went away. Now we're going to talk about, out of that 24,000 wells, there's 13,248 active wells, and this was on the October production report that I pulled off. Now, of those wells, there were 12,313 that are producing. So in that report, there was some production, whatever it is. And, this goes from in the 30, 40 million cubic feet a day to going all the way down to a fraction. Depending on how long the wells were produced and how they declined over time. Now, the other wells out there, there's 935 left that are not producing. And so I break those down into 4 categories. 697 of them are just listed as active, so possibly not yet producing, but possibly expected to. 108 of those have a regulatory inactive permit. That's a RIANC. They're not producing. And to explain what this is, if a well doesn't produce for 1 year, so it's completed and it's just sitting there, they really are required to apply for an inactive permit and then tell the DEP when they expect, why it's not producing and when they expect it to come on. And then if DEP approves that, they give them 5 years under that regulatory inactive permit. And what I've seen with that over the years, and I give them the benefit of the doubt in the beginning that, new drilling, new regulations, new things to keep up with, that we saw these permits, I did, applied for very late. So maybe it's been sitting there for 3 years, and maybe then, the well inspector makes note and they call them on it. I don't know why they were late. But the interesting thing is they applied for it 2 years after when they should have. Then they've got 2 more years on that regulatory inactive permit. From the landowner's standpoint that's concerned about a well being drilled that's not being produced and holding my land, I have some concerns over that, but I think they might be catching up with that. So those wells, they do have to tell them why, and then if they don't produce it within the 5 years, they have to reapply for that. And then there was a number of abandoned wells, and that number was like 112. I forgot to put it in here, but that one is the one place where I think it kind of overlaps with that previous report. Those wells that are under a consent order to plug, they are in that process. Interestingly, in Tioga County, there were a couple wells at least on that, where we learned that they're actually trucking gas off from that site to another site, and I should have looked at that because it just popped into my mind. What they're actually doing with that, I don't know if they're putting that into the pipeline at that point or some other process, but they're looking at that, getting the gas off that site without actually having a pipeline to it. So let me say 2 things about this. One is about who's receiving royalties, how many people. And even to this day, I will still run into somebody who will say, well, did anybody ever actually get any money out of that oil and gas thing? And that's obviously somebody who didn't. But yes, a lot of people. It's been a huge benefit to people in this state and out of the state, because we have people who own oil and gas rights, live in Pennsylvania. We have people who own the rights and not the surface. We have people who live in other states and own rights, probably other countries, I'm sure. And they actually passed a law at one point that if you received any oil and gas income, royalties, lease money, anything like that, that they have to take Pennsylvania withholding. And so hopefully that made it possible for us to make sure that people, that non-residents were paying the tax that's required in Pennsylvania. And that forces them to file a tax return for that. And I will mention tax returns before we're done with this. So 12,313 horizontal wells drilled. And, I'll say this. I said it went back to 2004. I've seen wells fracked with 4 stages. And now we're seeing wells. And, I couldn't remember the biggest number I've seen, but, we're talking over 50 stages in a frack job. The technology has just leapfrogged. We just had Repsol brought on 3 wells in Tioga County. The highest numbers we'd seen there, they were Marcellus wells and over 30 million a day in production. So that's a new record. And so same formation, going at it different ways, fracking it with more stages, drilling longer laterals. The first laterals were 5,000 feet and less. Usually a lot of them were less. And now we're seeing laterals that are over 20,000 feet. So dramatic changes. Yes, people are receiving royalties. And by my estimates, and I'll talk about conventional in a minute, why this number is so high. But I think in unconventional plays, there's probably over 250,000 recipients of royalties of some amount from Pennsylvania wells. And then we add the conventional on, and there's probably over 300,000. It's a big number. So yes, people are benefiting, and will continue to do so for decades, as far as I can see. These wells they're continuing to drill them. They're continuing to produce. Our well, the first one that they drilled here in 2008, is still producing. So this is a long-term project. So conventional wells, I want to say I don't deal much with people who have conventional wells, but I do get calls from them, and usually it's about their well not receiving royalties for a long period of time, and their lease being held, which makes me think I need to jump back here. Okay, so I mentioned about the importance of these wells that are not active, some of those, and certainly these wells here that are not yet producing. Probably more on this page. You've got a lot of wells that are spud, 1,493, that have never produced any gas. And we have these wells that were never even spud. In both cases, there are some people who are in a limbo about whether their lease is valid or not. And, unfortunately, it may be very clear that your lease is expired, but a lot of companies don't easily acknowledge that. They don't want to let loose of it. So, if you tell them that you think your lease is expired, maybe they're going to make you hire an attorney to have that released. But just know that there are laws, and you do have your lease with hopefully some language maybe to protect you there. But if you got a well that's been sitting out there since 2008 and never produced anything, Should they really, can they legally really hold on to it? You need to be aware of that. And, and then you need to decide how you want to pursue it. If you're going to be drilled at some point and they're going to want to come back to lease you don't want to be in the situation of, ending up signing something that allows that lease to continue to be effective. Just be aware of where you are on that and what these non-producing wells, what their status really is and what that means to your lease. So conventional wells. These are wells where they don't have to simple layman's, they don't have to go to extraordinary measures to produce the gas. So they're typically porous formations where the gas flows out of them. In our area, Trenton Black River was one. There are Riscony wells, those wells that it's like sticking a straw down in and sucking the gas out. And when you saw those blue dots all over that map, that's what you're looking at. So conventional oil and gas reporting is allowed to be confidential for the first 5 years of production. And then production is reported yearly thereafter. So you'll see this is the report that I took off several weeks ago, and it was for 2023 production. I'm not sure the 2024 might be out now. I don't know how long that takes. I don't follow it that close. On the conventional wells, hopefully you realize by now that they do have to report that monthly, and it's for two months prior. So in January 15th, the report came out. That was the production for October of 2024. So in this report, there were a total of 81,771 active conventional wells. I didn't even look at inactive wells or total permits or any of that. And I think the numbers would be staggering there. So there were 68,534 that produced gas. Now, we're not talking about the numbers in production that we are with the unconventional, but it's a lot of wells. And then 21,157 that produced oil. And these numbers overlap. Some can produce gas and oil. And then 349 of that total produced coal bed methane. So this is a part of Pennsylvania. I don't know what percentage of the gas produced comes from here, or where we are on oil when you compare us to other states, but we always want to remind Texas that it started here. The first commercial oil well in the world was drilled in Titusville, Pennsylvania. So that's where we are. A tremendous number of permits issued since 2004 in the unconventional play, sorting it all out. A lot of those went away. Just nothing ever happened and they expired. And then, of course, 12,000 of those, or 13,000, excuse me, are active now with over 12,000 of them producing. Okay. So two more things to mention. One is we just sent out a press release, and if you're a member of POGLA, you would have seen this. Hopefully you'll be seeing it hit your papers and letting everyone know, because this is important to all those people who I mentioned who are receiving royalties from oil and gas if they qualify for this deduction. So prior to this involves a depletion allowance for royalty income claimed. And prior to this, if you're a royalty owner, you could deduct 15% in depletion off the gross on your federal return. But Pennsylvania did not allow that. Pennsylvania did allow for cost depletion allowance. And so if you were an investor, let's say, and you bought your property for the oil and gas rights and you put a valuation on it, you could then take, it was cost depletion, and it's like depreciation, as it is depleted. with percentage depletion, you don't have to have a basis in it. So you think about the farmer that's owned their land for 100 years, 40 years, whatever, that bought it for farming, and now they're producing gas underneath it. There wasn't a basis to take that to depreciate. So now they can take that 15% deduction in Pennsylvania. We've seen an acknowledgement from the Department of Revenue about it. And it was passed. It was Senate Bill 654. It was originally our bill. Senator Bartolotta introduced it. We pushed for it. We worked on language. And ultimately, it didn't pass on its own. Senate Bill 654 became the vehicle through fiscal code and had a lot of other things in it. But what we ended up with was very clean language saying it follows the federal rules for the deduction. So if you're collecting royalties, you need to be aware of this and make sure that if you hire a professional that they're aware of it. Sometimes things slip through the cracks, and you want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the other thing I want to mention, I will be starting some paid webinars soon. And the first one that I am going to do is it's a how-to for the DEP website. And the DEP website has a lot of information that you can get free. But sometimes people find it a little daunting. They don't know exactly what's there. And so I'm going to do some how-tos that will help you do specific things. I'll show you around the website and then show you how, for instance, to look up a cumulative production report on your wells and get those into a form that you can do something with. Now, another thing is the site has changed. I think it's kind of a dramatic change. I'm guessing that people who aren't, if you've never been on it, you're going to be fine because it's the way it is. But if you've been using it for a very long time like me, when they move the cheese, they change the location of everything, you have to figure out where it is. And at this point, looks to me like everything is there that was there before. Last time they made some changes, there was a problem, and I know I was in contact with them, and they got that fixed so that you could get what you needed. But everything's there. It's you got to get to it a little differently. You got to save some new shortcuts, but it's all there. So those of you that are subscribers will get a notice when I put out those paid webinars, and they'll be held at a specific time and small groups where you can interact and ask questions. So that kind of wraps up what I have for today. I thought it was good to start the new year kind of knowing where we're at with oil and gas drilling in Pennsylvania, mainly gas at this point, at least with the unconventional. I hope that you'll share this with others. Let people know it's out here. If you find it beneficial, comment on my YouTube page. I would appreciate that. So thanks for joining me today. Anytime I'm going to have a webinar, I will send notice and I'll send a reminder in the morning, and you can tune into those new topics. So thank you, and see you next time. Now, I will check over here to see if I have any questions. Question and answer hasn't been real big, but that's okay. A lot of times people email me afterwards with their questions. And since I don't see any, I think I'll call that good. So thanks for tuning in.